Welcome to this special Writing Bravely podcast series where we write our way through to the other side. I'm your host, Dr. Adina Silvestri. Join me here and at writingbravely.com to talk about how a creative act like writing can move us through the healing process. Hola all, and welcome to the Writing Bravely podcast series, episode 5. Today we are talking about how to deal with loneliness. And a quote that I picked for this episode it's from a great movie. You had someone to go places with. You had a date on national holidays. Marie, When Harry Met Sally, 1989. That was a great movie. Does that resonate with you at all? Just thinking back over your life. Some of us went to great lengths to have dates on national holidays, weddings, family events. Some of us may even be going to great lengths now, depending on your path in life. Loneliness is a feeling that I know a lot of us avoid. And the thing is, we've all felt lonely at different points in our life. So it's an important topic. If you listen to the Atheists in Recovery podcast, hi, air listeners, if you're listening, you know that I've described loneliness as an epidemic. It's so prevalent and it's also so destructive mentally and physically. So let's talk a little bit about loneliness and how to deal with it. For this episode, I want to talk about one type of loneliness only. So there's psychological or interpersonal loneliness. The interpersonal loneliness would be, do I have a friend? Do I have a partner? Do I have someone I can tell my troubles to? Do I have someone to take to national holidays? But then there's also existential loneliness. Do I fit into the universe? Does my life have any meaning, purpose, or weight? We're going to specifically talk about interpersonal loneliness for this episode. I also want to talk about loneliness as a feeling that we tend to run away from. And we're really good at that. We're really good at, if we're in an uncomfortable situation, grabbing that cell phone, scrolling on our phones or our devices to make it look like we're busy, saying that we don't want to go out, yet going home and scrolling on social media, sometimes for hours. And it's something to really be curious about. When we experience loneliness, if we're talking about loneliness versus solitude, when we experience loneliness, the main thing that you'll feel is isolated and separated. And that can be painful. It can trigger our deepest fears of not being enough or not being connected. Versus solitude, which is not a feeling, of course, and it's an experience of being alone and being very comfortable in that aloneness. So this loneliness can trigger our deepest fears of not being enough, of not being connected for whatever reason. Whenever we experience that fear of loneliness, we automatically think there's something wrong with us. And so that triggers us not to want to reach out. And then it's just a cyclical pattern, really. But even though we may fear being lonely, it doesn't mean we can't still enjoy being by ourselves, being in the quiet, enjoying the solitude. solitude can be wonderful. But at the same time, if you're not used to it, it doesn't take long for that urge for activity or entertainment to arise. So let's talk a little bit about what is healing regarding loneliness, maybe what's harmful and what just needs to be lived through. So as you know, our stories, whether they're maladaptive or not, they're our stories, and they define who we are and what our value is. Without our story, we feel anxiety. So, for instance, if your identity is tied to your job or your ex with narcissistic traits, I have a whole episode on narcissism and your ex being a narcissist in the podcast series. I'll link to it. Maybe it's physical limitation or limitations making it hard to connect with others the way that you used to. So then we begin to question our life direction. Instead of choosing old patterns and habits, we seek out activities with intention. So that would be helpful to begin to question our life direction. Sometimes we'll do that. Sometimes we'll be just more aware, more intentional with who we spend our time with. But it all starts with awareness. So half the battle of how to live through loneliness is to understand what it means to feel lonely. Understand what it means to feel lonely and how that differs from being alone. So if we're going to use loneliness for self-exploration, one way to do that, one way to use the fear of loneliness is to tell our story. And I know I've said we already have our story, and without our story, we feel anxiety, but I would be really curious about that story that you're telling yourself. Is it harmful? Am I less of a man or less of a mother because of X? Because so-and-so left me? Am I less of a man because I got fired from this job I was at for 30 years that I loved, but I could no longer perform this job because drinking was a requirement and my life comes first. My value comes first before the company. Think about these things. Think about your story. I think that's really important, and I really need to underscore that before we talk anymore about how to use this as self-exploration. So, as long as it's tolerable to sit with these feelings of loneliness, and what I mean by tolerable is on a scale of 1 to 10, are you at a 9 or a 10? Then that's not tolerable. Then you need to reach out. Reach out to friends, reach out to family. And it's going to be hard, but you really need to do it. Reach out to someone that you don't know. Reach out to a therapist or clergy or somebody that you trust. Reach out for help if it's intolerable, if it's a 9 or a 10. If it's not a 9 or a 10, then continue. Just sitting with these feelings of loneliness, being aware, understanding it, understanding the feelings of loneliness and the contours and the shapes and the curves. It'll bring you a greater sense of ease with the emotion itself. It really will. So this is one way to not get caught up in the story. This old story that has maladaptive qualities that is not serving you in any way whatsoever. It's to be more present and start to write the new story. Or think about the new story. Or perform some creative act about the new story. Writing works for me, so that's what I'm going to talk about. And if you have a pen and paper handy, these are 2 prompts for you to help use loneliness for self-exploration. The first prompt is things I do not want to forget. I love this prompt, guys. Things I don't want to forget. This is also another one. A good one is, if this body part could talk, it would say. If this body part could talk, it would say. So for instance, if you're feeling the feelings of loneliness, say in your chest, then you would talk from that body part. Your chest would be doing the talking. Yeah, it's a little out of box. It's a little different, but trust me, it's a really good prompt. I've used both of them in my writing groups before. Okay, well, that's all I have for episode 5, how to deal with loneliness. And for more information on how to write with me, maybe even writing your way through the feelings of loneliness, see how I tie those 2 together, guys? I'm getting good at this. Head over to writingbravely.com. And maybe if you like what you see, you schedule a call. Maybe you would be a good fit for our group that's starting next month. And I would love to have you. All right, guys, have a good one. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Writing Bravely podcast series. Join the Writing Bravely community over at writingbravely.com.